When it comes to ensuring your company has top-notch security practices, things can get complicated and time-consuming fast. Now you can assess risk, secure the trust of your customers, and automate compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and more with a single platform, Vanta. Vanta's leading trust management platform helps you automate evidence collection, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. Save hours of work by completing security questionnaires with Vanta AI. Go to securityweekly.com/Vanta to watch their on-demand demo. That's securityweekly.com/VANTA. Make sure you subscribe to the Below the Surface podcast by Eclipsium in partnership with CRA. We've had the pleasure of speaking with some amazing guests, including Zeno Kova, Richard Hughes, Vincent Zimmer, and more. We discuss topics related to firmware and supply chain security, uncovering those pesky vulnerabilities that lie, well, below the surface in your environments. You can find all the episodes and subscribe by visiting eclipsium.com/podcast or searching for Below the Surface in your favorite podcast catcher. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on their RSA Conference 2024 full conference pass. The RSA Conference will take place May 6th through the 9th in San Francisco and on demand. You can register using the discount code by visiting securityweekly.com/RSAC24 and use the code 54USSECweekly. We hope to see you there, except I won't be there. Larry might be there.
Where is that?
RSA?
Yep, I'll be there.
Okay.
There's going to be a bunch of Security Weekly production
People.
folks there.
Mr. Sam Bound and Mr. Lee Neely have joined us. Sam and Lee, welcome. Yes. What's going on?
Yes.
So,
Paul,
yeah.
Before we get started on the news, it's been a very interesting week here in the studio because
we're in some weird purgatory right now.
It's interesting. we're in FU Unit Studios because we're no longer in G Unit Studios because G Unit Studios has closed. And well, quite honestly, this is now like all green screen. Like, see, like I can't touch any of this stuff back here.
It's not really. Yeah, it's not really.
Like it's not really here. It's just all green screen.
It's not really there. It's all in. Well, that stuff is really there anyway.
I mean, no, it's all green screen. But we had a couple of things like very reminiscent of the early days for us. Like we showed up early today, and we basically
made it look like Radio Shack threw up on the table, which was one of the early quotes and jokes from Larry back in the day.
Right, because we literally had to build the audio setup every week, and then we
probably still will be doing for the next several weeks.
Yeah, because we're all on. Paul and I are all on new equipment here in FU Studios.
While some new old equipment. Again, we're in this weird freaking purgatory limbo.
And like weird. At the end of the last segment, you mentioned, I forgot to push record after the first 5 minutes.
Because I'm trying to record us locally
to
as
get
well
the
as we're recording
But do you remember what happened on our very first episode?
We forgot to push record. Yep. And the funny part is, years later for Stogie Geeks episode 1, I forgot to push record. We had to do it again.
Yep. So like here we are, Inception. Like we built podcast.
In my defense, I haven't had to remember to push record in a really long time.
Yeah. So I will try to help to remember you to press.
Yeah,
record.
I'm going to put it in the show notes and stuff, which is also weird now too. Anyway, let's talk about more weird stuff.
They're all weird stories.
What weird stuff do we want to talk about? Do we have a weird story?
We always have weird stories.
They're all weird stories.
I'll give you a weird one. Hidden programs and vinyl records. Ooh. My story number 9 isn't necessarily a security thing, but I thought this was absolutely fascinating. There's a gentleman out there, Pierre Dandumont, which is interesting that he posted this via ChatGPT, and that's an interesting one into itself. But he's been working on cataloging from the I want to say the 1980s onwards, various audio media that had like subcarriers or hidden tracks, which when captured into a computer device contained potentially hidden programs or other subtext or subtitles and all of these types of things. Um, and he says he's got 30 of them. He had a bunch of stuff that he captured um, like into the 1990s and even into the current. And there's a huge bunch of stuff here. Um, there's programs for the TRS-80.
Yeah, it's also in the track 0 Day by MC Front a lot.
Yep.
There's a Commodore 64 game.
Yep, exactly. There's a ton of ZX Spectrum stuff. Yep.
I guess
so I thought this was fascinating.
How did one in the 80s get a program onto, or I guess I can understand the onto, but off of vinyl?
Well, Jeff, if you think about it, in the 80s, I know I'm thinking back to my TRS-80, the program storage was on cassette tape.
Right.
And it used the audio out of the cassette tape into the system. So instead of using a cassette player, you put your vinyl output into the computer and take the I'm guessing, I mean, I never did it, but that I would see that's how you do it. It's an audio out from one audio playing device to an input on the computer, but it's just now a difference in the medium, whether it be vinyl or cassette.
I guess that's if you had a turntable that was plugged into a stereo system, sound system. If you had one of those like all-in-one systems, maybe not.
I mean, you probably really don't need a lot of amplification for something like that. So doing it on the low impedance output would probably work really well. Just guessing.
And why did I was, the article was too long, didn't read it because there were so many examples. Was this done for pirating purposes primarily?
No, it was done to be cool because
Just
we're going to take advantage
cool.
of this new medium and give you a little bonus and
Like an Easter egg.
Yeah, like Easter eggs.
Okay, Easter eggs. Okay, I was a little disappointed that he didn't mention backmasking at all.
Ooh. Explain to the listeners, Jeff.
To the young people. On the old days with vinyl turntables and albums, there was probably mostly in the 60s and 70s, there was a trend for some bands to record things backwards and put them on the end of tracks, songs. And if you had a turntable in those days, very often they were free spinning. They had a neutral setting, so you could manually spin it backwards and hear hidden messages. I don't know if they were the first, but the Beatles were famous for doing that on, I think, Sgt. Pepper's album and the White Album in particular.
Nice.
And I think Pink Floyd did it as well. A couple other bands did it.
Now I gotta break up my Beatles White Album and do that.
Do you have a free spinning turntable?
Is my turntable
the Fisher Price
one free spinning? I think most turntables are free spinning. No, I don't know.
No, some are geared so you can only spin them the correct direction.
I'll have to see.
And you have to have one that'll free spin while the amplification, the needle and amplifier are working, so that you can actually hear it. Otherwise, you've got to hold your head really close and it gets awkward.
I apologize. I thought that was common knowledge. I forget that I'm old.
Yes.
How ironic.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeff, I knew this, but I'm also old. Maybe not as old as you, but I do remember those days. And
well, what
Jeff is writing Dinosaur Old. Larry is just Rocks Were Soft and Dirt Was Young Old. I'm just fucking.
And the other one more legend from the days of vinyl was it Pink Floyd's The Wall album that supposedly was synchronized and you could play it as a soundtrack to The Wizard of Oz.
It does.
It works. There's a YouTube. You can actually there's a YouTube.
Oh, God bless the internet these days. I can just go to YouTube.
That is what they would refer to as a term called synchronicity.
That's an album.
That's an album.
Yep.
But if you did it in quadraphonic sound,
I remember those days in college. I mean,
All right,
wanna
let's
talk
move
about
on to
locks?
cassette tapes or at least DVD ROMs. Let's get it up to the present.
Yeah. Let's talk about locks.
Locks.
Unsafe
Lock.
lock.
Unsafe lock. Yeah.
Unsafe lock. Did you
No,
see this?
safe lock. Then
It's Safe Lock is
unsafe
the
lock,
company, right?
Safe lock is the company. Yeah.
And Unsafe Lock is the hack that we don't have many details about yet. However, it's the vulnerability is impacting over 3 million doors on over 13,000 properties in 131 companies have adopted these locks, mostly hotels from what I
Yep.
gather, right?
Yep.
All locks using the Safe Lock system are impacted, and all the series they list there. And what's interesting to me about this vulnerability thus far is that to remediate this, it's pretty crazy. So all locks require a software update or have to be replaced.
Yep.
Additionally, all key cards have to be reissued. Front desk software and card encoders have to be upgraded. And third-party integrations, elevators, parking garages, payment systems may require additional upgrades. That sounds expensive.
Yep.
And how far are they in the process of doing that?
What did they say? 36% or something?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. 36% as of March this year, and they began in November. And so not only when they say update the cards and you have to update the readers and all this type of stuff, it is specifically because the original issues with these with the Unsafe lock is that the cards in use were MyFair Classic.
Yes.
And they found a way in which the locks were processing the MyFair Classic that you could effectively take one card and present it to the reader to reprogram the lock, to then present a second card, because there was a spot where I did find more on this.
Yep.
And I'll see if I can hunt the link.
I think people that are close to RFID hacking could read this and then probably derive what the issues are.
Yeah, it's effectively you're presenting one card to reprogram the lock and it would flash once type of thing, or have a continual flashing. And then you present a second card, which would then effectively become a key that would unlock the door and would unlock it as well. One of the questions was, oh, well, that's fine. I'll just lock the deadbolt in the lock while I'm in the room. And if I have a vulnerable lock, well, no.
That's
because the
electronic
safe
too.
lock is also, the deadbolt is also controlled by the RFID tag, the authentication presented to the lock as well.
Yep.
Oops.
Otherwise, they couldn't get in if you had a heart attack and died.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, in many cases,
Emergencies.
that is done with an actual physical key. But the unsafe locks do not have an official key here.
Yeah, and obviously you would rely on the chain or the, what do they call the thing that's not the chain, but it's it's a hook and loop.
The little flippy thing.
The flippy thing. The flippy thing is the technical term for it. I guess if you banged on the door hard enough, you could just bust that out of the wall.
Yep.
Jeff,
So
to your point for like emergencies and such.
Yep. So there's an article in Wired by Andy Greenberg that has a little bit more detail on this. Unfortunately, I'm on my last complimentary article from this IP address. So, but it is definitely, as long as you can read a card for that hotel, you can then use that card to create your new modified cards. So all you need is a sample, meaning you need to stay in the hotel.
Yep.
And then you can read your card and effectively create a master key.
That unlocks everything.
Or
would reprogram everything.
Find a card that someone has used, like when they've got those little drop boxes out front. Just get one out of the drop box that's already been used, and you can allegedly use that one to quote create a set of master keys as well.
It's something to do with the encryption mechanisms used in MyFair Classic.
MyFair Classic and effectively how SafeLock implemented that.
Yes, because it's to Jeff's point, right? It's usually the implementation, not the crypto itself.
Correct.
So this is an implementation flaw.
Yes. I mean, arguably, MyFair Classic has a bunch of implementation flaws already, but this goes above and beyond.
That requires brute forcing, right? You have to brute force a bunch of stuff. Because I've tried to do it with my Flipper, and the Flipper is not great at cracking MyFair Classic. They did release a software update subsequently to make that better, but I haven't tested it again.
It has gotten better. So it's you're effectively using 2 to potentially 3 different attacks. One, if you can recover a key, or a default key, you can effectively unlock the card with 1 key and unlock all of the blocks and sectors, which means you can read the other keys for the other blocks and sectors, which means you can recover all the keys. If you don't know a default key, which means you effectively have to brute force it, but there's some shortcuts because there's some key diversification that happens, but it uses a random number generator. And the random number generator is time-based, and it's time-based on reset. And and if you can do a timing-based attack and issue the resets at the same point, you will always get the same nonces for key diversification.
Yep.
So doing that brute force is easier. The third one is they fixed MyFair Classic to have a more robust random number generator, random generator that is not based on time. But the entire key space is small, and you can calculate it, and you can load it in memory of about 4 gigs of memory, and have the entire key space calculated and run through it like that.
So that's not being done in your Proxmark.
Correct.
Your Proxmark might be able to get the sampling of the keys, right?
You can with a Proxmark connected to a laptop. You could do what's known as the hard nested attack. It's the nested attack, but you have to do it the hard way.
Gotcha.
Come to take Sans Sec 617.
Yes,
the wireless attacks, and you can learn.
Yeah, RFID is one of those things I hadn't like really dug into before. Yep. I did get like a knockoff Proxmark. I may actually get another one. They're fun.
I ordered one of those too.
Yeah. Hey, to clarify,
one too. Jeff,
I finally got to the part of the article where it talked about the crypto, and I would say this isn't an implementation problem. This was just really bad crypto, weak crypto.
Yeah.
Oh, really bad crypto on which part, Jeff?
Well, just the fact that from what I was reading, they're using some sort of random key generation function based on something that's hardwired into the card effectively. So if you know how to do it and you know what to look for, that's not really good crypto. A certain place I used to work for, we used to design systems assuming that everybody knew all that, and they'd still hold up against attack. And that's not what was happening here. Basically, the other thing that's really bad, Paul, is when people try to roll their own. That generally is never good. Crypto is really hard to do. Nation states struggle with it.
Wait. Proprietary encryption.
Samuel, could get a comment.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'd like to mention my story number 5 because Google had put up a threat model for post-quantum cryptography, and they said, to my surprise, that they seriously expect our existing public key stuff to be broken within 10 to 15 years. And that means we do have to jump on post-quantum cryptography now. But since the post-quantum cryptography systems are not reliable yet, we need to double encrypt everything with something like RSA followed by post-quantum crypto. So hopefully at least one of them will survive the next couple decades.
So I'm gonna hit that if you don't mind. First off, quantum decryption is not an on-off thing. It's not a binary. Nation states are going to get it first, maybe lead, and then it's going to be multinationals, because the nation states are going to spend billions to trillions. The multinationals are going to spend millions to billions, and then it's going to keep going down until in about 20 years, I expect to have a quantum computing phone. Okay. But yeah, I actually have been giving companies, no, I'm not joking. I've been giving companies 3 to 5 years before quantum decryption is available for nation states.
Well, and there's a few companies out there that are have the GDP equivalent of nation states.
Well, that's why multinationals are right after them. Look, Sam, IBM builds a modular quantum computer now.
But the noise is still so large. Okay? However, regardless, if that's true, then we should all be using post-quantum cryptography already, and nobody is.
No. Wait. You're wrong, because here's the thing. You know your data classification matrix where you have public, internal only, confidential, and restricted? Great. You need a column. and the column should be danger period or data half-life,
Right.
is what I've been calling it. How long is your information dangerous for? In 5 years from now, your restricted information, do you care? I mean, the
That's
whole
right.
concept of
Yep.
encryption was in 5 million years, when they brute force decrypt my banking records, it'll be archaeology. I won't give a crap. Right, Jeff? Okay.
You're on the right
So-
track. But yes.
Right, but
So, but the point is that if your information is not only valuable or dangerous or critical or whatever for 3 years,
But
you
it's
don't
huge-
care for a couple of years.
but everything
now, at
is
that point,
oh,
at that
everything's
point,
dangerous for longer than that. I mean, my credit card number, my password. I mean, all kinds of things are going to be dangerous for 10 years.
possibly, but on a corporate level, that doesn't matter. And plus, if you want to worry about that, then just use iMessage. They've already put PQ3 in, which is a post-quantum algorithm in place on iMessage for Apple. Okay, so we've already got post-quantum cryptography moving into the battlefield effectively to become battle tested. And it was very smart to do an iMessage because you're not supposed to put critical information in a bloody iMessage, in a bloody text. Okay,
But I mean, this means all of our storage needs to be, well,
symmetrically encrypted, which is what it is at rest.
you're right.
Paper.
Okay, you're right. Okay, you're right.
Paper.
The symmetric encryption is not going to break. Okay, so this is only for transmission. So TLS should be post-quantum.
Yes, absolutely agreed. Now, TLS should be post-quantum. With TLS 1.4, I expect it to be. With TLS 1.3, I expect it to be because
But-
it's pluggable. It's
But
pluggable.
But it's not at all ready, right?
Well, no, it's actually PQ3 is apparently ready. Apple's trusting it for iMessage. Now, do I believe that it's ready to be dropped in place right now? No.
Yeah.
Do I believe that it's ready to be dropped in place in, say, 6 months to a year? Probably.
But also,
All-
Apple's also using Kyber and dilithium in their
they're-
M series processors, which
They're
was
testing which one is going to be battle tested. They're testing which one is going to be smacked, cracked, whacked, destroyed. So
Right, but
they're
Go-
running a fucking bake-off.
and but GoFetch is the new vulnerability. There's a side channel attack that is able to break, or I'm not sure if breaking is the right term. It's able to derive it because of a speculative execution vulnerability, essentially.
That sounds like
So-
breaking.
So,
Yeah.
Sam, what I've been telling companies recently and clients is if you have information that is danger period longer than 3 to 5, now I honestly think it's 3 to 7 years, but I say 3 to 5 to be paranoid. If you have information that's dangerous longer than 3 to 5 years, start sending somebody around with a briefcase. Has to be handcuffed to the wrist for maximum 1980s drama. Should be a 0 Halliburton aluminum case and has a code keys inside for 10 years worth of transactions, or a seed code. Sets of seed codes for each of your clients. And just don't trust TLS. Send it around symmetrically encrypted over the TLS channels that you've already got. And Jeff will know that as a one-time pad style approach, pre-asymmetric encryption. Because Jeff remembers when they did that in World War II.
I do. But technically, web traffic is also symmetric encryption once the handshake is established. TLS is establishing the session because
Yes, but if the TLS can be, if the handshake can be decrypted, then I've got the symmetric key to decrypt the traffic.
and if you want to store something data at rest, write it down.
Well, I think we should talk about that Apple vulnerability. It's all over the
Yeah.
place.
Let's do it.
Yeah, Sam, what was your take on the new GoFetch?
Well,
vulnerability?
I was real pleased to hear Steve Gibson go through it, and what he pointed out, I think, is that people are panicking over nothing. I mean, it is very dangerous. I mean, one process can steal the secret key from another process in just a couple of hours, so that's bad. But there is a patch available in principle, although Apple doesn't seem to have released it yet. All they have to do is use their efficiency cores instead of their performance cores on the M1 and M2, which will make it slower, or they have to turn off the extra feature in the M3, which will make it slower for cryptography. But if you're willing to make your cryptography about a factor of 2 slower, there's a software fix that will get rid of this problem. And the
So
question is whether-
how did this get labeled as unpatchable? Because I read it and I was like, wait, that's not.
Well,
It's technically
well,
not unpatchable.
well,
I mean, the
no,
patch
in
isn't
princi-
great.
Well, no, in principle, the cores, like the performance cores, are vulnerable, and you can't fix them without replacing the processor. So in that sense, it's unpatchable.
Yeah,
But there's a
I gotcha.
workaround. Yeah. I mean, it's just like Spectre and Meltdown. You can't fix the processor's mistake. without a new
Yes.
processor, but you can alter your software to dodge the weak spot.
Yeah, that's back in the Pentium days, Paul, when they had that math problem.
Yeah.
It was unpatchable because it was in silicon, but there was software that they could do to get around it.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, do you have your?
I had to install
napkin
that
over there?
fix
I've used
on
some
my
alcohol
Pentium
on the
90.
table here.
I don't have any napkins.
No,
But I think this
Oh, well.
does mean we need patches for all crypto software to dodge the weak spot. And it means that everything is vulnerable on the M1 or M2 until everybody patches it, which is going to be a while, I guess.
Correct.
Just wait for the M4.
Or the M3, apparently, it could be more secure more easily, but they'd also have to patch the software on the M3. The M3 needs to turn off this extra hash lookup function that is the problem, and it's not off by default. So I think if you're using any non-Apple apps, they're probably at risk right now. And maybe even the Apple ones. I don't think Apple has been entirely clear about whether their stuff has really all been updated.
Interesting. And if we're going down the math route, I do not have it in the show notes because I just remembered it. But apparently, there's some first practical SHA-256 collisions that happened.
What?
No.
At 31 out of the 64 steps of rounds.
Oh, okay.
So
We confirmed.
So it's not quite yet there, but there's progress to be made. And they only really released one slide to Twitter, but there'll be more details coming soon. And it says they were able to obtain a colliding message pair in about 43 hours with 560 threads and negligible memory.
So does it apply to SHA-3 also?
I don't know. They only mentioned 256, and that was about it. The remaining portion of that is still unknown.
Because that was the whole point of SHA-3, is they anticipated that SHA-2 might fall because it was too close to SHA-1. And so they made SHA-3, which uses a whole different system, which would hopefully not fall.
Why not jump to SHA-5? That's way farther away.
It may come to that.
Okay.
But SHA-256 is so much further.
Are hashing algorithms resistant to quantum computer?
I think so.
You know,
I've
that's
never heard of an attack.
Really good question.
I've never even heard of anybody trying to attack a hash algorithm with a quantum computer. So I guess I don't know the answer.
Well,
They're non-reversible.
I mean, so you
The
kind
challenge
of
is
have to
creating
brute
a
force it,
collision,
so it's
not-
more like
not
symmetric.
brute
So
force
maybe
it,
they
Paul.
are.
I mean, ooh, wow. You know, that's a really good question.
Well, reversing is another challenge. I mean, reversing to one of the
Interesting question.
multiple solutions. I mean, there are various attacks
let's
you would
leave
like
that
to
as
do
an
on
AI
hash
attack.
algorithms, but I haven't heard of anybody trying to do any of them with a quantum computer. It's an interesting question.
It says Google says it's possible. There was some research, the security of hash functions against attacks using quantum. It says that can be broken by quantum computers in one or more iteration, namely one more step than in the case of classic computers. So it says it's possible, and there's apparently people researching it.
Interesting.
But I haven't seen any published paper. I mean, we could. It's good
It
homework.
says hash functions are considered to be relatively secure against attacks by quantum computers.
That would be my thinking. But what do I know?
Which is the thing that I always have to warn my students and everything is that you think math is like nice and strong and perfect and secure, and it's not at all. This stuff is all like, we don't have a known attack now. It's a whole lot shakier than it ought to be.
For
Fun.
sure.
What's next?
To talk a little bit Flipper Zero stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of like neat. You can turn your Flipper Zero into an AirTag, and you can run this process in the background. So because it has a Bluetooth, chip, and you can write. They basically ported some code over that would make it look like an AirTag, and run that in the background. So you can track your Flipper as an AirTag, or the Samsung one, or the Tile one. But the Apple one, I think, is the one to use because it communicates all the Apple devices, and those are the most prevalent devices.
Yep, arguably larger ecosystem, more diverse ecosystem, and so forth.
But Paul, would you ever be willing to part with one of your Flipper Zeros to use it as an AirTag?
Well, you could use the Flipper Zero for other things, but also in the background, it would beacon as an AirTag.
Right. But what would you? I'm just trying to think of the application.
It's so you can
Finding
find your
Flipper
Flipper.
Zero.
Yeah.
So you can find
all
your
it's for.
flipper. Okay.
Yeah, so you
Right.
can find your flipper, but arguably, yeah, you could. Jeff, I see where you're going with this, Jeff. Is you could turn your flipper into an AirTag and drop your flipper in someone's bag, so
Right.
that you could track them, and it
Right.
wouldn't make noise in the lost mode and some
Right.
of those types of things like that Apple's been and Paul, you were sharing this with me earlier, and we're talking about it while we're doing some setup, and this is actually pretty interesting. And I need to dig into this a little bit more because, hey, come take the SANS Sec 617 wireless class where we talk about spoofing and creating your own Apple AirTags. Like this was a little bit of a step above in some of the other stuff that we talk about, and an evolution because the tools that we talk about there is Open Haystack largely, because Open Haystack can create an Apple AirTag on and give you a firmware with keys and so forth to put on small device like an
There you go.
ESP32.
So
or
they
your
do
BBC
support
microbit.
ESP32. Yeah, because that's what I would use, Jeff. Like I have this ESP32 right here
Mhm.
that comes with a screen and
Yeah.
a whole bunch of I/O ports. That was $13.12
And-
on AliExpress,
and
and so I wouldn't
arguably-
even use something like this.
Yeah,
I would just use an ESP.
Yeah, ESP32,
32,
which is probably under $2
Yeah.
type
Gotcha.
of thing. With that firmware, the problem with the Open Haystack implementation is that it can't clone keys. You can't clone. You might be able to create your own MAC addresses, but it doesn't do any of the official key rotation techniques that the Apple AirTags do. So it's always got the same static key over and over again. And from what I was reading about this one, that it is much more dynamic in its key renegotiation because it can create the keys directly on the flipper to clone a tag. So I thought that was kind of neat. So arguably this might be a step above in some of the other code that's already being used for some of the other stuff. So
Kids, don't
I
try
thought
this
was
at
pretty
home.
novel.
We're just talking about this hypothetically.
Oh, the other thing was how to use a Flipper Zero to test the security of your home network. And while technically possible, I mean, I don't think it's I shouldn't say the right. It is not the best device to test the security of your home Wi-Fi network.
I would agree. I mean, this implementation, as I was reading earlier, is above and beyond some of the other wireless attacks that I've seen on stuff like the Marauder, which is effectively you're running Marauder on the Wi-Fi chip, which is connected to your Flipper Zero.
Yeah,
and-
but the note there is your ESP32 that comes on the Wi-Fi module that they recommend you run. And most ESP32s are only 2.4 gigahertz wireless.
Yep. And now you've got the advent. 5 is everywhere. 6 gigahertz stuff is starting to creep in a little bit in the home security on the home side. So of limited utility. However, the utility that I saw here about potentially doing deauthentication based attacks and capture of the four-way handshake, the PEEP, and and some of those exchanges, that was new. I hadn't seen that that was capable in some of the devices, even the Marauder. So that's new, and that actually has some use to it. But the motions that you need to go through to do that, to get then the hashes saved, to get it to another system, to crack, like
you still need to get Hashcat on another system to run the brute force against it, right? So it's technically you're going to need something other than the flipper anyway.
For $50 to get a wireless adapter under Kali, Slingshot, whatever distribution, and have all of those things cheaper and maybe a little bit easier workflow. Yeah.
I mean, if you're on a budget, you could use a Raspberry Pi with a dongle and put Kali on your Raspberry Pi and be off to the races. And you could do so much more with
than
that.
just that. And
like I'm working on building out my Raspberry Pi 5 so it can be a dedicated Kali device that I can plug all kinds of things into to do stuff with. That, like I don't want to mess with the Linux on my other systems. I want to have a dedicated system, but I don't want to lug around on a laptop.
Yeah, this is quickly where I'm approaching with the Raspberry Pi, and I just need to sit down and spend some time to do it. I read this great article where this guy takes this do 50 things in a week approach.
Mm-hmm.
And his approach was do 50 things with a software defined radio that I've never done before in a week. And I'm like, whoa, like sometimes some of this stuff takes me a week to barely even get the stuff installed. And he's going to do 50 of them in a week. And quite honestly, it was quite impressive. It went a little bit longer than a week. And arguably some of them were like, make an antenna. And it was cut a length of wire. And that was one of the things.
Right,
like,
right.
oh, okay. But as he's going through all the different neat stuff that he tried, I'm like, well, I'd love to set up a Raspberry Pi with an RTL SDR just to do that all the time. And I'd love to do that. And I think I came up with about 30 of the 50 things that he did that I could very easily dedicate a single Raspberry Pi to capture that data all the time.
Yeah, that's cool.
Someday I'll have racks of Raspberry Pis and RTL SDRs to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot right over there that we can put it too.
And arguably there's better RF data here than there is at
I know.
my home in the backwoods.
Yeah.
Huh.
Being in I noticed that when we do stuff here in the studio with anything RF, there's a lot more sampling to be done because we're in more of a commercial populated area than when like you're in your home. Like,
well, I mean, and like
that's my stuff.
Your home, you live in a neighborhood where there's lots of cars. Like
Right.
in my neighborhood, they roll up the sidewalks at 6 o'clock.
Yeah,
because
right.
There's nobody. All right, what else we got? Who else has got some stories in here?
Sam, you got some stories.
Yeah, I got a couple other just vulnerable by default, like Shadow Ray. Ray is basically a load balancing thing used for AI applications to handle a whole cluster of servers. And by design, it lets you launch processes on all those machines with no authentication at all. And it just tells you only deploy it on a trusted private network. But then a bunch of people have projects you can download from GitHub that deploy it publicly. And thousands of them are deployed publicly, and they found they've been owned for months, mining cryptocurrency and doing all sorts of stupid things. And there's another similar one. A bunch of Google databases are just wide open, sharing their data with everybody.
Wait.
And both of these are because apparently the default is insecure of these products. And CISA came out a few months ago and said, quit designing software that is insecure by default.
You know,
which is not a bad policy. Yeah, go ahead.
Sam, there's a worse problem with the Shadow Ray one, right?
Yeah.
And the worst problem is that they disputed the CVE. The company did.
Well, that's right. They said this is working as intended. It's supposed to have no authentication. You're supposed to only be on a trusted private network, so.
But they disputed the CVE. So there's now a CVE that is disputed, which means that anything that scans for vulnerabilities won't see it by design. And it's a 9.8. So if you actually look back through CVEs and look for CVEs that are disputed, so they do not show up on a vulnerability scanner, and you look for ones that are, say, above a 7, I don't know, what's a 7? Is that a critical? Oh, oops.
Nope, 7.3.
You'll find quite a few of them that if you scan for, amazingly enough, there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of them out there that are wide open.
Yeah, but that's we were talking about this last week. This is where you get the limitation of the CVE system. I mean, what if you deploy it in violation of the instructions, like with a weak password? How's a CVE supposed to catch that?
Right. Why are you deploying it with the default password?
That's an important vulnerability, and it's something not covered by CVE.
Because null passwords were bad too, Josh.
Yes, but you could deploy it with an individualized password for that machine or that installation, and it's that simple. But then I have to
tell everyone that password. If I leave it default, everyone can just log in.
Right. So arguably, that would not be a CVE. That would be a CWE.
Yes.
Right. And in this case, they deliberately had no facility for authentication because it's supposed to be fast. That's why they say the security should be outside this, because the whole reason you're using it is to rapidly distribute this workload.
Zero trust. Everything is fucked. Don't trust a fucking thing.
Well, it does violate zero trust. Absolutely. Yeah.
Performance and security don't.
And here we are back in the
along,
gutter.
Josh, right? Weren't you listening when we talked about speculative
That's what she
execution earlier?
Yeah.
Yes.
Look,
That
performance
would
and security
imply
can-
we ever left.
Yeah, see, it's warm and comfortable, and all my friends live there. It is absolutely possible for performance and security to coexist, at least to enough degree that they are still usable. With the amount of oomph we have in horsepower that we have in machinery today, I mean,
Well,
there's
to
no
be fair,
excuse.
adding security costs some money. It means you'll need more servers. It slows you down to some extent, and therefore you have to balance the cost of the risk against the cost of the defense.
I can
There's no
make
simple
encryption
answer.
incredibly fast. It's just easy to do Caesar cipher, but it's incredibly fast.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably made Jeff cringe.
Well,
Okay.
there were-
No, he wasn't cringing. I think he was agreeing.
I wasn't
with you, right?
cringing.
Right.
A one-time
These are
pad
things
is
we're talking-
unbreakable, but it's incredibly slow
right.
and hard to distribute keys securely, and it requires one-to-one, point-to-point communications or
Yep.
data sharing always.
It doesn't have to be slow, but the key distribution is the huge problem.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and that's why we came up with asymmetric encryption, and then we're back to quantum cryptography and quantum decryption. Anyway,
That's right.
it is such a problem that we are looking at encryption as a problem right now. It is such an issue that encryption being this kind of problem is. And by the way, I found an article that says that hashing algorithms may be affected by quantum decryption. It's in Slack. I should probably throw it in Discord, but it is interesting.
Yep.
So we have one of the foundational elements of the internet, asymmetric cryptography, which is going to be under attack in a very, very few years.
It's always been too good to be true. I mean, sending a secret over an untrusted medium is kind of black magic any way you cut it.
It really is. It's amazing black magic. It's honestly beautiful math. It really is.
Yeah,
But
but
if anybody-
none of that matters if we're getting at the data when it's decrypted. If we
Of course.
have a
In-use
keystroke
encryption?
logger, if you have a keystroke logger, or you have a screen scraper,
Right.
or you're implanted on either end of that system, yeah, sure, I use Signal. I can read all of my messages, even
That's
though
right.
there's end-to-end encryption. And I think that's where a lot of attackers are going to go. There was actually another,
And that
Bluetooth
is a
hack.
very novel and new concept, Paul.
Yeah, right?
Attack the endpoints.
I remember a few years ago, somebody actually complained that signal cryptography was garbage because you can read it on the endpoint. And,
What? No.
I know.
Well, it's because all that signals cryptography was invented to simply protect the data as it was being transmitted.
It's all you can do. You have to be able to read it on the endpoint.
Yep.
Otherwise, what good is it?
You write it down, you perform a Vignere cipher to decrypt it manually, and then 3 hours later you can respond back.
Burn before reading.
But cryptography has never been the solution to this problem that we call information or data, or now cybersecurity.
It's part of it.
Just ask Bruce Schneier.
Oh, good Lord.
Well, cryptography is one of our controls. It stops some attacks. It just doesn't stop them all.
And actually, we're
It's a
seeing,
tool.
It's a tool. It's a useful tool. It's a wonderful tool. It's honestly a beautiful tool in its own way. And we're starting to see companies, I know this isn't a story, but I think it's fascinating that we're talking about encryption. I'm starting to see companies talk about in-use encryption as something that they're getting asked to do.
Yep.
So it's interesting that we've had at rest and in transit forever and a day, HIPAA, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now we're seeing in-use encryption. So we're seeing
HIPAA, PCI. Come on now.
And GK snarks work that way.
So
And homomorphic encryption is
Homomorphic
definitely the wave of the future. But it's right now, all the ones I've seen are very slow.
clunky. I think the word is clunky.
Bite your tongue,
Lee-
Sam.
Lee-
Homomorphic
Lee- Lee's
encryption
got a
is
comment
not,
here.
by definition, encryption. I yield the floor to
So-
the gentleman from.
So
Idaho.
when the EO 14028 first came out, it had 3 encryption requirements, one of which got dropped. It was data at rest, data in transit, and data in use.
Really?
They
It had
quickly
data in use
dropped
was
the
dropped.
third one because the basically encrypted in situ unless you're actually accessing it. It can be done, but it's a pain in the ass, and it is a performance hit. I think prioritizing of the two was a good choice.
And Lee, for clarity, that executive order was the new omnibus bill, right?
This was the improving the nation's cybersecurity.
Yeah,
14
It gives us
also
zero-
referred to
zero-
as the omnibus bill.
2021.
Yes.
I think we need threat modeling around encrypting data in use. I wonder if it actually stops any realistic attacks.
I think it does. Well, the idea is it's encrypted. If you're on the system and you're trying to read through, storage, which is not, whether it's memory or disk that's not encrypted because it's being used, the actual data element isn't retrievable. I'm just not sure how practical that is, because I mean, maybe it's not the specific information, but you can get enough other metadata that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and Microsoft has had in Visual Studio since I think 2014. They've had a special data type that automatically erases when you're done using it, so it doesn't remain in memory. So I mean, there's another simpler solution there for that problem.
Yeah. And I mean,
This
databases can do field level encryption.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Sam, the method you just mentioned becomes a problem when some poor implementations that then at some point are told, just go back and get that key out of memory, and the memory has been wiped, and now the keys become a static fixed known value of all zeros, and we've seen that with some wireless attacks.
Yeah. But I'm thinking if you had, say, privileges to use a machine, then you clearly have privileges to decrypt some of the data and use it. So malware running as you will see it. So what exactly did you get from this encrypting in use thing?
It's an interesting question. If you do it properly, it gets encrypted data.
No, but if you have the ability to use it, then you clearly allowed to decrypt it. And
no,
so is
that's
malware.
not true. You can ask questions of the data. It doesn't mean you get to see the data.
And I would argue that
but that's like homomorphic encryption, is you can perform operations on it while it's still encrypted.
Right.
You can, but since I'm authorized to perform the informations, then I'm able to get the secrets, and therefore the malware running as me is able to get the secrets.
Right.
No, I
so
didn't say
what
that.
have you really
I said you're able
accomplished?
to ask questions of it. I didn't say you're able to see the data.
No, but well, all right. But
You can extract usable data in a manner similar to what you have the privileges to do, is what he's trying to say.
Anything I'm allowed to do, the malware can do.
Agreed. But
so
if
we
all
already
I'm allowed
have
to
a
do is
system. You can
ask
have an active
questions.
so you can have an Active Directory user group that only lets me do certain things.
Right.
And that would be as strong a defense as this homomorphic encryption.
Absolutely. We're on the same page. And you can
So
basically do it like blind SQL injection, if you will. What's the first set of figures? What's the second set of figures? What's the third set of figures? And so on and so forth.
The best kind of hard drive encryption is what I have on my other laptop right now.
Oh, geez.
And that is when it boots up, there is some bug that does not accept all of my keystrokes. So when I enter my passphrase, I just can't enter my passphrase correctly because the keystrokes are being somehow interrupted. What I figured out to some research this morning is that the file system may be corrupt, and it needs to do like an FSCK on the data, and that's when this particular event occurs. Now, what's interesting is I booted on a thumb drive, and I manually mounted it with the crypto things in Linux, and I can mount it just fine and get access to my data. So I have my data, but now I need to rebuild my laptop.
Can you now the question will be, once you've booted thumb drive and can unlock the disk, can you run FSCK on it so that it doesn't require it to be booted with FSCK on the next
tried that, and it gave me some version mismatch because my encrypted file system is using some feature that the version of E2 FSCK I was running doesn't work on. And so
I can fix this. I know how to fix this, Paul. It's really
Sledgehammer.
simple. You open up your working computer. You type in Amazon.com. You find a hard drive that's compatible, and you buy it.
I just put a new hard drive in it.
I was thinking SpinRite might work too.
Yeah.
That device right behind you, Paul, will copy a drive. Maybe you could clone the drive and not clone the bug.
Yeah, I'm still, like I said, I can get access to my data, but I'm going to have to rebuild my system. anyway.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Spin
anything
right.
short
Spin right.
of a rebuild, and Paul's going to be thinking, it might maybe still be in there. Because
Spin right.
the rest of us
Spin-
would too.
It's
Not
just a
just
huge.
Paul.
It's a huge inconvenience. Again, we're back to that balancing act we play of
Yeah.
security and convenience, right?
Mhm.
I was trying to be more secure by encrypting my hard drive, which already, even when it's working, has an inconvenience of it takes longer to boot up. And I have to remember and enter my password every time I boot up, which is super annoying. And I was getting in the groove of that, and then I had this issue, and I'm like, so now I got to weigh some factors to be like, is this a security control that I want to maintain?
Well, I have the solution for ultimate convenience. Just get a brain chip, like my story number 1. Now
Yeah.
Neuralink is implanting brain chips in,
Boom.
so then you'll be fine, right? You'll never have to buy another computer, and everything will be fine.
Yeah, I don't have to enter my password. It just connects right to my brain.
That's right.
Sweet.
Of course,
So
there
this
might
person's
be.
playing. But I've heard of this before. Like this is not science fiction. This is the actual
No.
tech that
Yep.
there are neural interfaces between humans and
yeah.
computers today.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And the story listed here is from Neuralink, which is one of Elon's companies, whichever.
Yes.
And it was, so let's not get hung up on that. But the fact that it's doing amazing things, like I saw something that a little tangentially, that the guy that got this Neuralink stuff and was able to use it to control pieces on a chessboard said that he stayed up all night playing chess because it was so amazing.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Well, I think he was also, is that the quadriplegic that was able to do it?
Yeah.
So he's quadriplegic, and for the first time in God knows how long, I forget what it said, he's able to control something. That's pretty damn cool.
Yep. Sign me up. Sign me up.
You want to be a quadriplegic?
No, the other part,
No,
so I
I
can
mean-
control stuff with my mind.
Speaking
Speaking of controlling stuff with your mind,
controlling stuff with controlling stuff. Go ahead.
Real quick. Sam put me down this path on your last story. You can still purchase SpinRite 6. And the last time the page was updated from Gibson Research Corporation was December 20th, 2011. And SpinRite is NTFS, Linux, and TiVo compatible. Just in case you wanted to know. Sorry.
Oh, it's being actively updated. I mean, maybe the page is not updated, but it's being updated right now.
Could
I
you
thought that
plug
was
in
like-
vinyl to it and extract a program?
Yeah, but I thought that was like debunked.
You have to do it
right?
backwards,
Like,
though, on a free spinning turntable.
It
There
does.
you go.
It does some operations, but like there's some people that like really dug into it back in the
Yep.
day, and
Yep.
it was kind of debunked. And a lot of times, data recovery, in my experience, is all about like how much you want to spend.
Yeah.
Right. So
$89
you can go-
in this case.
Yeah, $89, or you can buy more advanced software, or you can like go hire a company, and then you can just keep paying them money, and they'll keep trying to recover your data, and you may get some of it back. You're really playing that game. Really, the game to play is have really good backups.
Actually, you want to know the funny part? You can actually go backwards beyond that. I worked a case once as a digital forensic expert, and we actually had to send it out, the drive, and it was a medical facility, a hosted server. And not only did they get the data back, which was wonderful because they got it back and it was great, and I helped them sort it all out. They got 5 other companies' data off that drive. All medical companies.
Oh, because it had never been truly wiped, and so the data recovery was able to.
It was a shared server, and it was supposed to be a dedicated server.
Oh,
Nice.
okay.
That happened to me about 24 years ago. Think of where I was working, where drives were expensive, so they'd fix them and repurpose them. So I happened to be at a top secret facility, looking at a system. What did we call them back those days? Mid-sized servers. It was a server.
Mini computers.
Mini
we call them?
computers. But when we brought the system up, we had a complete database from Toys R Us, their entire inventory, all of their systems. I'm like, okay, this is really weird. And if it could happen to them on our end, what are we doing with our drives that go out for
what is
repurposing?
It begs the question, and it's very timely right now. What is an effective method of data destruction for
Well-
systems you're getting rid of.
Thermite.
Well,
Is
if-
it physical?
if
So
you're- if you're
that's the first
encrypting your
question.
hard drive, nuke the key, and then it can't come back.
Right. But so is it physical or are you using software?
Logical. With all the solid state stuff, I'm favoring logical because it's actually doable. I mean, as
Mhm.
Josh indicated, a couple rounds with a 9mm will take care of a lot of stuff, but not everybody's going to be down with that.
Writing
Sledgehammer
so
works great on a drive.
overwriting with zeros a couple times is even
no,
even once is probably enough or no?
no,
It
especially on
depends on
solid
which
state.
tool of thought.
If you
I
have a
can
solid
neither
state
confirm
drive-
nor deny
Hold
that.
on. Hold on. Josh, go ahead.
Okay, on a solid state drive, because of wear leveling and
Yes.
write leveling, even if you overwrite every accessible sector to you with zeros, ones, then pornography, then zeros again, then Larry's favorite pornography, Rule 34, then another set of zeros, you still will not get all the data because there are some blocks that have been locked off but still have data on them.
Okay.
Hence,
Now, Jeff.
cryptographic erase.
Yeah, I was just thinking at a cryptographic level, you have to overwrite. Assuming you can overwrite all the bits and bytes, you do it with something that's going to force every bit to be a 0 or a 1 repeatedly. So you go through multiple iterations to make sure they're all changed.
And
To
now,
Josh-
reduce
Josh,
the,
you're
to,
saying-
we
but
used
you're
to
saying
call
on
it
a solid-
object permanence. I don't know if that's, or remnants. Remnants was the term
Yeah,
a long time ago.
remnants.
But Josh, you were saying something different, right? On a solid state drive, even if you overwrite multiple times, you're still not getting rid of all your data
Right. With a
Right.
solid state drive, the only way to dispose of properly is physically, as in
physically.
hit it
and
with a
according
sledgehammer.
according to Travis Goodspeed, that is also true of magnetic drives now. Anything up a half a terabyte or bigger has extra blocks which silently substitute in when it has read arrows, and you can't reach them to erase them.
Okay, so everything is destroyed
See,
physically.
Up until a few years ago, the whole multipass thing was necessary because of the space between the tracks to make sure you erased the remnants. And as they got denser and denser, that space went closer and closer to zero, so the single pass would actually wipe it out.
Mhm.
However, with the equivalent of wear leveling, game over. Which reminds me, if you ever get a chance to go visit a tour of one of those drive recovery places,
Mm.
do it. It is wicked cool, the stuff they can do, especially if they show you,
All
they're
right, so
forever
but-
buying old drives off of eBay and stuff for parts, and they will
for the PCBs,
rebuild.
Based on what I'm hearing, though, it also depends on your adversary, like who you're worried
Yes,
about. But if
yes.
you really want to, if you want to be truly safe, let's say it's a solid state drives that take a drill and you go through the solid
Right.
state drive.
Well, I heard
Several
one
times.
solution here, which is what the iPhone does. If you turn on encryption before you ever start using it, and it's been on all the time, then just deleting the key is all you need to do.
Right.
But you have to do it before you start putting any data on there.
The way you do that on an iPhone now is set the passcode.
Right. That's why iPhones
automatic.
are completely safe. You can buy a used iPhone, and if they reset it to factory default, that data is just gone.
It's gone.
You can't
Yeah,
get it.
it's gone. I mean, unless you have access to technology like Celebrite or something like that, right?
No.
Are they,
No,
I
still
don't
claiming?
know.
Are they still claiming iPhone recovery?
And they can't do
Celebrate-
it
No, they're
anymore.
claiming iPhone unlock,
Well, you can give them a
but
locked
not iPhone
phone,
recovery.
right, but not a wiped phone.
Right.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
I see. If you, so
And-
you need to wipe it, and Apple's wiping process for that
Is
Your data
incredibly
is not-
simple. It just deletes the key.
And
Torches
And
the
then all
keys.
that data
Somewhere-
is just gone, gone, gone.
Oh, I see.
Somewhere
Okay.
around version 6 of Android, Samsung gave
Yep.
them a FIPS encryption that is now part of the Android.
Yeah, I see. Yeah,
ecosystem.
Android phones
So-
are definitely like if you
I wanna
forget
point
your
out-
passcode, you're in trouble with an Android phone too. Yeah.
I want to point out this goes back to what Jason Healy said, which is that we make it effectively transparent and we
Yes.
make it widespread. And gee, look at how much the security has risen.
But in terms of a hard drive from a computer, though, it sounds like the consensus is if you really want to be safe, even regardless of your adversary, physical destruction is probably the way to go.
Yep.
And it's
Well,
more fun.
But I think
Well,
if you turned
you
on,
got to destroy it correctly, right? Yeah.
but I think if you turned on BitLocker before you put any company data on it, that would be almost as good as the iPhone, I suppose. But I'm not
It
sure.
should be. As long as you nuke the key
Yeah.
properly,
Yeah.
then yeah, it should be.
Well, and it depends on some settings too. I mean, you can snip the
Well,
bus
actually,
for the.
BitLocker has a really bad flaw. Didn't we talk about that like 2 weeks ago?
Well, it depends on some BitLocker settings that off the top of my head I can't recall, but I have seen research where they're sniffing the bus for the key.
It also
And
depends on
and
what
this is
problem you're
only
trying
where-
to solve.
And this is
Yeah.
only where the TPM is external from the processor.
That's
That
correct.
was it.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
mean,
hardware
I
implementation.
think also you could technically recover that key if you could figure out how to solder something on to the processor to get at that TPM. But I mean, now we're like the complexity and difficulty is pretty high on that one. And again, it depends on your threat profile. What do you worry about, right?
It's time for a PCI 4.0 minute.
But see,
let's-
that was only to get into a BitLocker encrypted drive. It's not one where you've erased the key.
Erase the
In
key,
that
correct?
case-
Because the
in
key
that
is not
case,
going to be
it must have
transmitted.
been-
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Agreed, Sam. Great point. Sorry, Jeff.
Take
PCI
take
moment.
two. It's time for a PCI 4.0 minute. For many years, there's been a requirement to protect, obfuscate data at rest, which is primarily credit card information. Many companies latched on to things like BitLocker over the years and thought that they could use that, although the requirements for years have said if you're going to use something like BitLocker, you still have to have something else in place that just by logging into your account, you don't automatically have access to the data. So BitLocker, what we're talking about for hard drives, it's good to protect against the theft of the drive. Somebody walks off with it or somebody gains access to it. The 4.0 change is that, and you have a year grace period, but now PCI is explicitly not allowing full disk encryption as a method to protect any stored credit card data.
Is this for if you're getting
Say
rid
that
of the
again?
hardware, or is this in practice, Jeff? Like,
No,
can
this
you still
is
have-
people were trying to rely on BitLocker while the drive's encrypted to say that the data had been encrypted at rest. And because of the problems with logging on, and it's kind of a transparent thing,
Yeah.
anybody that logged in legitimately with their account had access to it. There's a similar problem, and there's some debate going on for similar types of database level encryptions, and I'm not remembering the term off the top of my head. Oracle has a term for file level encryption or something to that effect. It's kind of like
field level encryption,
Column-
right?
column
Versus
level
column
encryption.
level
Row level
encryption.
security.
Yeah.
well, they have a term where it's
Oracle labels?
effectively if you're the database is encrypted when it's stored on the
transparent
drives.
data encryption, TDE.
TDE, thanks. That's it, Josh. Thank you. So, there's
Back
been
to the threat
speculation.
model. Yeah. I mean,
Go
back
ahead.
to the threat model. If I'm logged in, I would have access to that encrypted database. So why is it any better than BitLocker?
No,
Exactly.
you're
Well,
absolutely correct.
that's the
And
observation that's been made.
They have key encryption keys and data encryption keys, and they make it so like fancy schmancy. And it's like if I break into the database server, it's mine. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Exactly.
Yeah. So my
Exactly.
question from compliance, we harp on PCI for this, and then we can maybe pivot to other compliance standards. Does PCI have language that says when you dispose of equipment, like do you have to have a process for that? Do you have to document your process for
Oh,
equipment
absolutely.
disposal? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I think
that's
most
been-
compliance
that's been-
standards would have something in there about that, right?
Yeah, that's been in there at least since version 2, which came out in 2010. But I'm pretty sure it's been there since the very beginning.
And is it they
2004.
recommend physical destruction of it in most cases, or is it
They
just
don't
have to document what
specify.
you're doing?
I mean, over the years, I like to play with my clients every once in a while. And one client I had, they used a hammer, and they said, we just take the drives out back and smash them. And I'm like, can I see the hammer? Is it military grade? And the guy went running off to get it.
Is it a $1,300 hammer? Right.
Yeah, that's right. But very common for
$500
third
toilet
parties to be contracted for destruction.
Yes.
We all know the name of those companies, and
We interviewed a company that was all about the data destruction and disposal
Yep.
one time in our history, because I thought it was interesting to delve into that at least once. And
Were they North
as we think about
American-
sunsetting some equipment, it's a thought that's been in my brain is how I get rid of that stuff. Because I think if I
Right.
just drill a hole through a solid state drive, I got to make sure I'm hitting the flash chips. Like I can't just drill a random hole, because
Right.
if
Right.
the flash chip is still there, I mean, Larry and I, not that long ago, removed a flash chip from something and read the data off of it. So you got to make sure you get your flash. So how many holes do you have to drill? But is there like a number?
No, you
How
don't.
many
you
licks
don't-
does it take to
does it
get the
take
center
to
of a
get-
Tootsie Pop?
How many holes do you put through
3.
your solid state drive? Your 2.5-inch solid state drive. Right?
So bring it to my house. I have an anvil. I have some hammers. I have a forge. And
we just melt them down.
and we have the ability to do some smelting as well.
That sounds great, but just think of the end of the movie Terminator and what gave birth to the sequel.
True.
That's true. And
That's true.
Speaking of melting, Paul, hand me
Need
an
some
ice
ice?
cube. I need an ice cube. Please and thank you.
Good
Larry,
segue.
Larry,
want to talk
Good
about your
segue.
truck story?
Yeah. Where are we going next? Go ahead.
Larry's
Trucks.
number 8.
Oh,
The truck-to-truck bug.
oh, yeah. This one was pretty interesting. Specifically, I'll take another one because that one's got ashes all over it.
It's ashy.
It's all ashy. It's got your ash all over it. You put your ash on it.
It's a smoke.
you like his
burger.
ash.
Examining his ash.
Yeah. So
with an ashy ice cube.
I don't know. Put it up your ash. To the story.
Dripping.
So some here, put it in here.
Okay. Thanks. Have an ashy ice cube.
Thanks.
Got a name for the
So
episode now. Ashy ice cubes.
Yeah.
One guy wants his ash, the other guy has his dripping. I don't know. It's kind of interesting what goes on there.
What is going on? What's happening?
Oh
Sorry.
my gosh.
We're talking about a truck-to-truck worm.
Yes. So in electronic logging devices, which are required in U.S. commercial trucks, in 14 million medium and heavy duty rigs. So effectively, the folks at Colorado State demonstrated how they could interact with the electronic logging devices over Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, connect to the device, perform an over-the-air firmware update with backdoors, connect to those backdoors, and then because they were connected to CAN bus, were able to issue CAN bus commands to take control of the vehicle.
Oh, that's really interesting. We were talking about this earlier on the Below the Surface podcast about how embedded systems that have chips that run like real-time operating systems. So not even Linux, like embedded Linux, but like free RTOS.
Yep.
Which I believe is what's underneath a lot of the ESP32s, right?
Can be.
Because like when we say, "Oh, I'm running Python for my ESP32," it's not just Python interpreter. It needs to run on something to enable the hardware, which is usually like a real-time operating system, like free RTOS. Yeah. And so I was like, well, these chips are really cheap. We just said they're like $2. So why wouldn't I use them in commercial applications that now I've enabled Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in all the things? Like what could go wrong?
No, absolutely nothing. Yeah. What could possibly go wrong? Hey, that's
And connected to the CAN bus. Like why not?
Well, that's part of the problem is those Bluetooth and Wi-Fi are enabled by default. They didn't even bother to turn it off.
But my question is, how are these devices intended to communicate to actually do what their intended purpose is?
Typically, the trucks that go into depots, when they go to a Home Depot, they pass under a Wi-Fi access point that interrogates the logging devices. That's
Right.
what I've seen before.
Right.
Did you say a Home Depot?
So they
Yeah.
No. I did not say a Home Depot.
truck.
Well, he said a Home
Truck
Depot, but
Depot.
he meant a home.
So my brain just went crazy when you said that. I'm like, why do trucks need to stop at Home Depot? Like, are they doing some home
Have
improvement?
you ever seen how much stuff they have at those places? Jeez,
I know,
man, they
right?
truck there every day. Chickens, logging fences, whatever. Anyway,
But
so
come back. So what I'm asking is, don't they need to have the Wi-Fi enabled in order to?
yes,
do
but
the-
with a default password and a predictable SSID, perhaps you could change that.
Well,
Yep.
and or
Well, doesn't that
you know-
depend on where
No,
and
no,
how
only
they're
a few trucks
reporting?
carry depends.
Okay.
does it need to be on all the time?
But then, well, so that's a great question, Lee. Now, does it need to be on all the time? No, arguably it doesn't. So how do you know when to turn it on?
Right.
You
And
use,
now you start talking about
an RFID
geofencing.
active
geofencing.
passive tag.
Well, I mean,
Geofencing, yeah.
Arguably, these trucks are probably receiving GPS, GLONASS, Baidu, potentially on where they are. So they know where they are on the planet. So they could, when they get to that depot location, they could turn on the Wi-Fi through other systems. Now you just need to trick those systems to believe that they're someplace that they're not. We've talked about that on the show.
And do they need to authenticate in some way? Does there need to be some sort of I mean, it sounds like a huge key management problem. If there's how many millions are on the road of these things, and who's responsible
Only
for
accept authorized firmware or whatever properly.
If only we had a way to
whatever.
If only we had a way to, I don't know, what would you call it? Like, signature, some code or something?
like a hash function.
Firmware?
Like a hash function.
Firmware?
Back away from the quantum edge there, buddy.
Well, I mean,
we knew people that knew something about firmware. God,
I mean, Josh, they're
they're
probably signing their.
those
They're
are-
probably
But that's
they're probably
interesting.
signing their firmware like MD5, and like there's no collisions there. Right?
Yeah, but like
No,
as I
absolutely
work
not.
with the ESP32 platform a little more, it's interesting. Like I get really sketched out because they're intended to be chips and boards that are open and willing to accept any firmware, and you can go anywhere on the internet and get firmware, and it'll go, "Hey, I'll happily flash on your device," and I'm like, "Well, hold on, like what's in that?
But
what's in that firmware? How do I validate
Now
that firmware?"
typically you have physical hands-on access to something like that.
Correct. The way you flash the firmware is I have to
plug it in
USB,
Yeah.
and I have to hold the boot button down
And this-
or some combination
right.
of boot and reset to get it into bootloader mode,
Yep.
which then enables a serial interface that allows me to shoot the firmware.
In this case, in the electronic logging devices, it's over-the-air firmware.
Mhm.
So over-the-air firmware would be reliant on the software already running on the
on it.
device to receive that firmware.
So the bootloader needs to have some keys to validate the firmware.
or the application itself. The currently running operating system has to have the ability to validate the firmware after it's been uploaded.
Right, because the OTA is in the running firmware and or air codes operating system, right?
And I thought this.
I'm
was,
going
this
to
was
go out
pretty
on a
needed.
limb.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that whoever the vendor was that built these devices, and maybe there was more than one, but they're all built to spec.
Yep.
So there were two other things I picked up, and I thought Larry would have caught. One is I got the impression that while there's like lots of these devices, there's not a lot of diversity. It's only like about 10 or 12 different variations of ELDs, which means if you're going to hack one, you have a pretty good chance of one that'll work on any random truck going by.
Yes.
That's
Was where Paul.
Did I read that right?
Yeah, I think you read that rightly, and I think this is part where I think Paul would find this kind of fun, because in some of the cases, all you needed to do was, as they say, achieve this attack by a drive-by attack or hanging out at truck stops and rest stops, because but those last two, Paul's really a big fan of, right? So you can hang out at rest stops and truck stops a bit. And so, you get it deployed to one truck, and then like this device now with this quote rogue firmware, which in one of their examples, they were able to drive by their subject Kenworth truck with a vulnerable ELD, the electronic logging device, and in 14 seconds was able to effectively connect to the Wi-Fi, recover what they needed for the Wi-Fi, do over-the-air firmware updates, deploy that over-the-air firmware update, and then have that firmware update start sending CAN bus messages to make the truck slow down. 14 seconds.
You know what's funny? I think at this point, our friends and spouses, if we said I need to go spend some time at the rest area for security research, they would probably be like, there's been weirder things you've told me.
Yep.
It's just stranger things. They've observed so many strange things, and we're like, no, it's for security.
It's for research.
What are why do you have sex toys on the table? It's for
can-
security research.
I can specifically remember back doing my metadata research when Twitter banned pornography on Twitter, and so we had to go to other third-party sites to get adult
But
images.
they didn't really ban pornography.
I mean, well, they tried to ban upload of adult material to their image sharing services. So image sharing services showed up because at the time there was no image sharing services. So they now new image sharing services that are tailored directly to those, and I was able to effectively enumerate all the things and get that stuff. And here I am sitting on the sofa, scrolling through these images, trying to find, looking through metadata, and porn. And I'm sitting on the sofa next to my wife and we're watching TV, and she looks over and she's like, "What in the hell are you looking at?"
It's research.
And I'm like, "It's porn and it's research." And she's like, I'm right here. I'm like, I know.
It is we've conditioned our friends, family, and spouses that it's research.
Yep.
Well,
Exactly.
you have to remember to consider the context of that kind of a sentence. That might be an indication it was time to switch tasks.
Yes. I mean, don't get me wrong, Lee. You are absolutely correct.
But some of us need a more obvious hint than others. And I'm only speaking for me because I know myself. But
Well, I think this article is a perfect example of what Josh was talking about last week in terms of, I mean, what jumped out to me in the article was that the researchers said that, you know, these findings highlight an urgent need to improve the security posture in ELD systems. And I'm thinking, what security posture? They don't have a security posture. But this is an instance where, okay, now somebody's figured out a way to misuse this stuff. And I'm not going to remember the term that Josh used, but you know, it's got to be the vendor that's, or the developer of these things that's responsible, not the trucking companies or not anybody else that's using them.
I think they are working on an update, and it's going to be a firmware update. So you see a chicken and egg problem, but actually it's probably likely to be more successful than not, is that, you know, they push firmware onto the ones that can and deal with the exceptions.
Yep. And so another one that, you know, the big one of this, the whole sensationalization of the article was that it's a truck to truck worm. That once you've got that that quote hacked firmware on this device, that 14-second attack, you've got control of the CAN bus, but you've also got control of the wireless adapter, and you have a copy of the firmware that is vulnerable. You can then use this wireless adapter en route with other trucks nearby, because the attack that they did was a 14-second attack driving at 20 miles an hour on the highway. And you think about getting stuck in somewhere like, you know, DC, or, you know, now in the traffic in Providence because we've got a bridge that's sucked.
It's been some,
or
the
in
horrible
Baltimore.
catastrophe in Baltimore.
Baltimore.
It's not as bad as the Baltimore bridges.
Yeah, I was
Well,
going to say there's not a lot of loaded trucks coming out of Baltimore for the next couple months.
I mean, in
Right,
terms,
or
I
going
mean,
in
the loss of
just
life.
through.
I mean, it was absolutely tragic,
Yeah.
right? But it's how frail. Also, I mean, I don't want to brush that aside, because it's important to recognize that, but also the impact to the supply chain and the way we get goods, right? How fragile that is.
Yep.
And these are, you know, we're talking about physical things here in Rhode Island.
Guess where your NVIDIA, guess where those NVIDIA cards that you're always looking for, Paul, guess where they come into?
California and Seattle.
Not the Baltimore port. I was just making that up.
I mean, we talk about silly things, you know, like that we want to buy. Like my little device I held up before, you know, that I ordered from China is, you know,
It's coming in from California.
Larry was telling me like where these come in, and this is just like, I need like fun things, but you know, that's just whatever. It's a fun thing, but there's much more critical things that, you know, we need to move goods around that are. It's just amazing how fragile that all is. So back to the trucking story, like disrupting that by attacking embedded systems and firmware is kind of frightening.
Mm-hmm.
It's frightening.
It is. But in the case of the Key Bridge, I mean, the fact that who knows how long it's going to take them to clear the river, the channel, as it were,
the port,
to get access to the port again for shipping. You know, I'm assuming that's going to take weeks, if not months. But you know, that's the first problem, and then you know, that's the bigger problem to me. The not being able to cross the bridge for commuters and traffic is a lesser issue, because it's one of three arteries, at least from north south, and it was probably, I mean, I drive over the bridge. I used to drive over the bridge all the time because my wife is claustrophobic. She doesn't like to go through the tunnels.
Tunnel. Yep.
So I'm very accustomed to that bridge. So I was asking my wife, I mean, are you going to suck it up and we're going to go through the tunnel, or are we driving around, which is also an option. So from a commuter perspective, it's more of an inconvenience. But then, yeah, I was thinking, oh, crap, but they're not going to be able to get ships into and out of the port for who knows how long.
So to tie this to that, tie that to the story a little bit, Jeff, refresh my memory. So there's 3 routes around the Beltway currently, and one of them is a bridge, which is no longer in existence.
Right.
One of the others is a tunnel.
There's 2 tunnels.
There's 2 tunnels.
Yep.
So if you have a truck, trucks are prohibited from using the tunnels because of what they could potentially be carrying.
Yeah, depending on
Hazmats
what they're
are
carrying. Yep.
Hazmat. So if you want to go through Baltimore in a semi, the only option is now gone, which is the bridge.
Well, there is, I mean, you know, there's a beltway that goes around Baltimore, and the bridge removed the bottom leg of it. But going straight through Baltimore, there are tunnels that go under the harbor. There's also a surface. It takes longer, but you can drive north to south and get to the other end of the beltway, or you just go the other way around the beltway. So there are ways to do it. It's just going to take longer. And that's a financial economic impact in and of itself.
And
but there are ways to do it.
Bringing that back to the story is that if you've got 3 methods, and sorry, you got let's say 5 methods. 2 of them are tunnels. One of them is a bridge that's no longer in existence. You've got 2 remaining around the beltway that trucks can use. You've now got potentially choke point for delivering these attacks. Right.
Now, I mean, the main corridor is in question is I-95, and I would guess that, and that's the newer tunnel. When I-95 was built, there was an older tunnel, 895, and the bridge itself, I learned, was just built in the 70s. I would have guessed as many times as I've driven over that bridge that, you know, just in terms of the north-south I-95 corridor traffic, the bridge probably took on maybe 10% of that, and probably more the hazmat type of things. I
like that Jeff's old enough that he can say it was just built in the 70s, which is when I was born. So, you know, there's that.
Well, there's a bigger bridge a little bit south of the Key Bridge called the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, which is 2 spans, and the second span was also built in the 70s. I remember that one being built. That would have been a much bigger economic problem in terms of commuting if that had been hit. Presumably, ships could have still gotten to the port, but maybe not. But just in terms of how much traffic there is going from the mainland of Maryland over the eastern shore of Maryland back and forth, commuters and so on and so forth. So anyway,
is it? But you know, from a threat modeling perspective, do you build a bridge with the threat model of, can we be resilient to a container ship hitting it, or is that
no?
Well, I mean,
no, right? Like that's not. So the situation here in Rhode Island is, I think, much more akin to a cybersecurity story of there was multiple inspections. And there was some like sweeping under the rug of these issues, and it basically accrued so much technical debt that now it has to be closed. And I think that's really akin to what we see in cybersecurity.
And not only does it have to be closed, they have to tear it down and replace it.
So
my wife said to me this morning, she says, "How can we get a container ship under the bridge and bring it back so we can crash it into the bridge and take the bridge down much cheaper, and get it done that much faster?" Like,
and hope that no one's on the bridge when that happens.
Well, it's closed.
It's closed.
It's closed, and we can schedule that in advance, so we'll have nobody on the bridge. To add some humor to this, dark situation, when the Baltimore thing happened yesterday morning, and it was on the news, and we were up, and my 10-year-old. We're watching the news and so forth, and oh man, the bridge is down, and the news anchor said, and all 4 lanes of the bridge are closed, and my 10-year-old just went, "No shit, Sherlock."
Right. Thank you, Captain Obvious.
You know what's really scary though? My wife is like, "Did you hear what happened in the bridge? Like, you check with your friends in Baltimore." I'm like, I saw it on social media and I thought it was a hoax. thought it was a hoax.
was
Like
not
that's how
April-
scarred I am from being in
it was
cybersecurity
It was
for
not
so
April
long.
1st yet. It was not
I
April
don't
1st
I
yet.
don't believe anything I see on the internet at all.
Oh,
Like
I mean, how
it's
about the people that think it was a deliberate cyber attack?
Pete,
Plenty of that going around, and let's not comment on that.
yeah.
Mm.
There's one. By the way, there's one more potential threat option here. Not that long ago, if you remember, in the Bay Area, it was 1982. So not very long ago, they had that tunnel in the Caldecott
I
Tunnel
like
fire.
how you say not very long ago,
Go in
and
the
that's when
80s.
I was 5.
In the
Okay.
80s.
Yeah. Okay.
Immediately. Love
So
you, man.
what they did,
It's just
it
the
was
other
because
day.
Of a, they
In
had, it was
1999.
hazardous material in trucks, and they won't let them. They would only let them through during certain hours of the night, like like midnight to
3
5
o'clock in the
a.m. or
morning, yeah.
something. That could
Yeah.
give you a great window to attack trucks if they allowed them to the tunnel on that kind of a
Mm.
limited schedule. As you now know when they're going to be in there with hazardous materials.
Yep.
That's an opportunity.
I'm
And
just
yes,
checking
1982
Google.
wasn't that damn long ago. It was only 40 years ago.
42 years ago. It was long ago. Google Maps
42
still
years.
shows a connection. Oh, but it's all a red dotted line now, and there's lots
all
of
four,
warnings.
Jeff, all
Don't
4
go there.
lanes are closed.
All 4 lanes are closed.
I want my
4
flying
lanes?
car.
Yep. Paul, BlueDucky.
Yeah. So this is just a continuation on the research from the person who presented at ShmooCon this year.
Yep. Hello, I'm Keyboard. Hi, my
Yes.
name is
Hello-
Keyboard.
Hello, my name is Keyboard, who is
Mark
also
Newland.
the
Yep.
same person who did the mouse jacking attacks.
Yep.
Which we covered a few weeks ago. I don't think you were here for that, but I covered a
I was
story
here.
where on a pen test, they actually leveraged that attack
Oh, no, I
and
wasn't here for
used
that.
hardware and software on the Flipper Zero platform to do that. Now they had to put an add-on on the Flipper Zero.
Yep.
But it was kind of nice to see a Flipper Zero in use in a penetration test against a commercial organization that executed, albeit an older attack,
Mhm.
still in play
Sure.
today because we don't update our hardware as often as we should,
Mhm.
and therefore they're able to inject a payload and get a successful C2 connection. The BlueDucky's not quite this. It is very similar in that you can basically do mouse jacking over Bluetooth.
Right. So
Right.
it is
Yeah.
leveraging the "Hi, my name is Keyboard" attack, but in a much more automated,
Yes.
much more automated fashion. It's
And that is over Bluetooth. You can inject keystrokes.
right, and that's what "Hi, my name is Keyboard" was all about. Was
Mm.
being able to inject keystrokes over Bluetooth.
Can you also intercept the audio? I want to say there's a facility
did.
to intercept the audio
So-
as well.
So
This was going
I
back when we were
don't-
talking about crypto.
I don't know if it was with BlueDucky, but stand by for half a second here, because I came across this story just the other day. Stand by. It is a tool called Blue Spy from
Blue Spy.
Tarlogic Security.
Yes, Blue Spy was the one we covered. You weren't here for. I'm just saying that because we talked about it and you just didn't happen to be on the show. But yeah, so there's like 2 kind of newer Bluetooth attacks. Blue Spy lets you intercept the audio.
Yep.
Between your Bluetooth audio device and your conceivably phone or laptop, right? And there's caveats here and specific devices on specific platforms of specific versions, or like it's not everything that's vulnerable.
Right.
It's specific ones. So Blue Spy, you're correct, Larry, allows you to intercept the audio.
It-
BlueDucky is the one
For intersecting
for
keystrokes.
for injecting keystrokes over Bluetooth.
Yep. And then so the Blue Spy one is fantastic because in early days of Sec 617 we talked about hijacking
Josh
audio
Wright did a whole bunch of research.
stuff
I
on
remember
that.
being at Sands, dude. Like
and
now when I say way back in the day, I'm not talking about the 80s.
You're talking about
When I
like
say
10
way
years
back
ago.
in the day. I say
It was
way
the
back in the day.
teens.
I'm talking about like
2008
2000,
2009.
yeah, 2008,
Yep.
2009, where Josh was like, "Hey, now remember again, this is like my perspective of way back in the day.
Yep.
we all had those Bluetooth headsets.
That's like, yep,
And it wasn't a headset. It was an adapter that went in one ear.
yep,
It had like a piece on it, and those were popular. Like if you wanted a Bluetooth
yep.
communications device for that paired with your phone, it wasn't the earbuds we have now
Right.
or wireless headphones. It was that one device you put in one ear.
So like, or
It had a
like,
thing.
like
I don't know what you'd
one,
call
one of
those.
them was like the Jabra headset,
Yeah.
and the Jabra was pretty new in that you put it in your ear and it did bone conduction.
Yes.
So it pressed against your
Yes.
cheek a little bit, so you could do bone conduction for audio.
And you would use it
stuff.
as a headset. And Josh was like, "Well, I know how to hack wireless stuff.
Yep.
I want to see if I can intercept the audio from that." And I
Yep.
think he had some successful attacks
He
on
did.
some of that earlier
did.
gear. Yeah.
Because the quote demo that he did was outside of the demo that he did was outside of Starbucks using his Nokia N770
Yes.
on Thayer Street, and the example was recording Twitchy hitting on the cashier.
Holy crap, dude. Like he was attacking Bluetooth on a flipper style device before anyone had ever dreamed
Yes.
of flipper or all of this gear that we have today.
Yeah. And now, arguably, this was an incredibly hard attack to do, and there was some machine in the middle style stuff, and
Yeah.
not very practical. But the other one that we also talked about was Car Whisperer, and it was instead of intercepting actual data, because taking data and intercepting that over the air, you key cracking and all sorts of mess there. But Car Whisperer, you could actually connect to the device, and then you're connected
Inject
to the
audio.
inject audio. But you could, because you were connected, you could also receive ambient sound from the microphone as well.
Right. Nice. And I told the story of Bob
Yes.
that was in a Starbucks and connected to a car and was able to inject audio, and there was kids in the car, and they were like, "Oh my god,
the police are coming for your
they're like,
parents."
oh my god, it's so strange.
Yep.
So then fast forward to today, this, even given what we know about Bluetooth attacks, there are still vulnerabilities that again, BlueDucky allowing for the keystroke injection and Blue Spy allowing for audio interception. All fun projects to play with that are on my project list. My projects that have projects. My projects have
I'm
projects.
familiar with this
Larry.
concept.
This is. I know what you mean now.
Yep.
So all this stuff is possible today, and based on some relatively new research that I think is really, really interesting.
Yep.
But not every like phone platform, and I'm getting confused with Blue Spy and BlueDucky because they're two different things. I haven't fully unpacked them, but they affect only certain Apple, Android, Linux, Windows devices Bluetooth stacks.
Yep.
It's not a
specific
universal.
version,
I don't
right.
think either one is a universal thing, but
Correct.
it's specific to certain platforms, drivers, devices, and what have you.
Yep.
Like getting to the defensive recommendation, what do you do?
Update
Update your firmware, replace your device. Same thing with mouse jacking, right? You're either going to update your firmware for your wireless mouse or keyboard, or if it can't be updated and it's a legacy device and the manufacturer is not providing an update, you have to replace that. And that's what the pen testers in that article I covered a couple of weeks ago were kind of preying upon was, like, if you've got a mouse and a keyboard is a tried and true input devices, right? They've been around since the beginning of time. And so you've acquired one. It happens to be wireless. What is your motivation and or thing to like update that device?
Yep.
It works.
Yep.
It's an input device. And I use my keyboard and mouse every day at work. I get into work every day, get in my office every day. This stuff works. Why? And I like this device.
Yep.
Why would I update it? And it comes back to when I had that Chinese gear thing that I acquired that does jamming that was marketed, and I bought this years ago, marketed as a cell phone jammer.
Yep.
But again, it was some weird Chinese device. I don't remember where I ordered it from. It jams
Amazon?
No, it wasn't Amazon. It was some
You
other.
can get them on Amazon now.
It was
and speaking of
it
Josh,
was like Temu, Temu, but before Temu kind of thing. It might have been actually AliExpress.
Yep. And speaking of which, Josh, I got to get you some money at some point because you have some gear for me.
I just haven't had a chance to get to the friggin'
In
mail.
any case, but like several months ago, I flipped that thing on, and it was jamming keyboards and stuff like that. So I guess the defensive recommendations, what I'm coming back to, is for critical things, and you can define that in your organization how you define it.
Yep.
You don't want to rely on RF communications where you don't have to.
Yep.
And mice and keyboards, and Bluetooth devices, given the current attack surface, that's a critical function in any capacity, you want to use a wire, right? Because
Yes,
that just
right.
greatly reduces your attack surface. And that
Correct.
was my recommendation here in the studio, right? When we had the wireless mice and keyboards, I'm like, if this is critical to production of the show, then we want to use a wire versus RF. Because again, if I can generate RF stuff, granted, FCC aside, right? Other people can generate RF interference, whether it's on purpose,
intentional or not.
It could succumb to this interference. So it's a business continuity thing. I think a wire is the way to go.
Yep. It's not as convenient.
So,
right.
Lee.
You're reminding me, excuse me, a conversation I had with a boss of mine a number of years ago about
In the 80s?
No, not that. No, it was in the 2000s, but 2010s even.
Okay.
But we were talking about wired versus wireless devices, and he's basically, the point he made is not whether the wireless encryption and security was strong or not. It's that the minute you start transmitting it, somebody else can pick it up and eventually tear it apart.
Correct.
Because whereas the wire, it's a point to point. I'm ignoring and generally speaking with wire, there's potential to pick up the emissions, but it's a lot harder.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Well, yeah. To your point, Lee, it is a great point, right? It's less attack surface.
Yes.
That wireless communication can be manipulated for both snooping, but also injection of data, right? When you go to a wire, it's super hard to inject into something that's an input device that is a wire, right? Now you could listen to those, and I see, in the 19 years we've been doing this show, how many times I've covered a story about covert channels in some weird manner, and I keep seeing research that comes about that you can listen to the electromagnetic interference is the wrong term. The electromagnetic radiation from keyboards and derive what's being typed.
Right.
Like there's a lot of, if you go look on the academic research sites, right? There's a
you
lot
could
of papers on that, and it keeps coming up.
You could actually look at the power draw on a laptop power supply when it was generating keys or decrypting data to deduce the power consumption to find the keys. We covered stories about folks that put like a meter were able to interact with the data of their power consumption on the power meter.
Yeah.
To be able to determine how much change was happening when their television was on, to determine what colors were which LEDs were being turned on their television, so they could tell what scene and what television show was being shown on the TV from their power.
Well, like my whole thing is just it's make it harder for attackers, right? And if the solution is use stuff that uses a wire versus wireless, and that greatly reduces your attack surface, do that. Make the attacker's job. Sure, you could argue it's still possible to intercept or snoop on communications, even if it's on a wire, but it's a lot harder, right? Raise the bar for attackers.
I mean, I'm going to ask the question of Lee and Jeff. What was the attack for being able to view remote images from a CRT? Starts with an E.
That's Tempest.
Tempest.
Yes, not E. It's a Tempest. Yeah. I mean,
at least Tempest was the defense.
Yeah.
Actually,
it was
the
a
first time
Tempest
it was done,
attack.
it was called Rowboat.
Interesting.
Right. Well,
you think I'm joking? It was a friend of mine who did it to an Air Force, the chief of staff for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, from a rowboat in the Potomac at the Pentagon. That was the first time it was ever done.
Nice.
He did it
That
physically.
you know about.
Binoculars. No, I know about them all.
You know about.
Want to bet?
I'm older than you.
So, what's that?
I'm older than you.
Yeah, you are. He's older than you.
Ouch.
You guys going to take it out back?
So hold on,
Nah,
hold on,
just gonna
Josh.
unzip and lay it
Explain
on the table right here.
Hold
So it's
on.
Tempest.
Explain it.
Move
Hold on.
on.
Explain to us the rowboat attack.
Or the
So
Tempest
in all
defense.
seriousness, that's technically not a Tempest attack, but it's interesting. So my friend was an Air Force officer at the Pentagon, and the RAND brought in a computer and said, "Look, you can do schedules and stuff with it, and all sorts of stuff." So they put it in the Chief of Staff office for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they were doing the Joint Chiefs of Staff schedule. Okay, and that's apparently classified on its face. And so he said, you're facing a window on this. And so what? So he went, all right, F you, took a rowboat, went out into the Potomac, apparently, and looked in the window with binoculars, attached a camera. He was a photographer, attached a camera to the binoculars, took a picture of it, brought it back, developed the picture, like chemical photography, and threw it on the desk and said, here's your schedule. And they went, that's classified. How'd you get that? He went, the rowboat that was out there, that was me. So now they had to give it back because they couldn't use it anymore because it had leaked classified information. Now that they had to give it back because it was a sample effectively, and it had classified information on it, they had to destroy the classified information or any possibility of it remaining. So they had these machines at the Pentagon apparently that went squish on the computer. And they gave it back, every little bit of it. It was only about this big though when they were done.
But a Tempest attack relies on, according to the definition,
EMF.
unintentional radio or electrical signals, sounds, and vibrations. Is how Wikipedia defines it.
I mean,
Visible light is part of the
Let's go with
electromagnetic
that.
frequency,
Let's go with that.
yeah,
Yeah, you're
and
right.
arguably Josh's attack works because electromagnetic frequency output, visible spectrum
Includes
is also
visible
on that
spectrum.
too. So he's not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think
technically he's not wrong.
We use. I'll shut up. I'm not going to say anything.
No, go ahead,
No,
Jeff.
Jeff, you're right. I'm fucking around.
no,
I
I
get
don't
it,
know.
but
This
Well, I
isn't-
mean,
this isn't
you know,
Jeff's,
Back in the days of Unix workstations and the cathode ray tubes, the CRTs that were like 30, 40 pounds, those things, they would shoot hundreds of feet the images. That was one form of Tempest testing. But anything I'll leave it at anything electronic that's broadcasting or emitting tends to keep going.
Right.
And so that was a consideration.
That's but also back in that day, Jeff, I mean, there was lots of other ways to get into a system and or to obtain information in an unauthorized manner that didn't
There were,
allow-
but the
like, didn't
early
rely on-
PCs were not networked, so the fact that you could read what was coming
No, that's a fair point.
out of the screen, and
Depends
it
on
would go for
depends
hundreds
on how
of
far
feet.
back we go, right? But like once we were networked, the way you got access to unauthorized information and or systems, right, did
Agreed.
not in general rely on Tempest based attacks.
But to NSA's credit, they didn't throw away the two buildings that they built copper clad. They kept using them, even though they didn't need to anymore.
No,
Well-
again, you got to know your adversary and your threat model, right? And who is attacking you and
but-
why.
I worked in one office. I hope I don't get in trouble for this. I
love it when you start. I love it when you start a story with, "I hope I don't get in trouble for this," because
They're
means that you're doing
recording
something
now.
really
They're
good.
sitting up and listening now.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going back to the 80s where I was in, let's say, one of the main buildings that did have offices with windows, but the blinds were usually closed. But if they were interior windows to the courtyard, they were allowed to be open. And in one particular office, we were allowed to not take all of our work papers and lock them up in a safe every day. We had these really special Tempest-proof black canvas cloths that we could just lay out over our desk. Why that was acceptable to this day, I don't know, but it was. We didn't have to lock stuff up. We just had to cover it, just so in case anybody's by whatever
Open
means trying to
storage
look through the windows,
Sure.
they wouldn't see anything.
So don't the whole idea with with this too is that, yeah, it may not be how we do a modern attack, but how many times we run into a hack where the old way still works, and that's how
Yeah.
a system is compromised. It's not unique to Tempest.
Well, Larry
And
brought this up. Did Larry have a question associated with this? I think it
No,
was Larry.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
You were just wanted to talk Tempest.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, and by the way, there's also emissions down the power cord.
No, yeah. Again, we've covered so many stories.
Yeah.
About
Well,
this.
There's also things that vibrate, because everything that's emitting a sound, it's creating a wave that bounces off of things, and you might theoretically be able to detect that.
Larry, you were talking about RSS feeds earlier.
Yeah.
One of the ones that I follow is the archive of these academic papers.
Yep.
That arxiv.org.
Arxiv. Yep.
Arxiv.
Yeah. Whatever. That's how I pronounce it.
Arxiv.org has an RSS feed that will give you by category a list of academic papers. And one of the ones that I follow is the computer science category on Arxiv.
Yep.
Okay.
It's a lot of data to go through.
Yes. Which story is this, or just a
No,
general thing?
so just in general, like my feed for this says that there are 3,145 articles per week
Jesus.
that are posted here. Now, I have other searching and filtering that like would pull a story from, like, so if something hit this feed that used the term UEFI,
Yep,
it would show up in like one of my other things that maybe has like 35 unreads on Monday morning when I go check it, right? So I follow this feed basically to feed my other filters in searching. And on this topic, like the number of academic papers that we've covered over time that talk about this, like, you know, data leakage, kind of espionage kind of thing, where it's everything from LED lights that are flashing on the hard drive to, you know, all this stuff. It's just staggering. And like when that becomes actual a practical thing versus when it's academic would be an interesting talk in my opinion. Like if you were to look at all of these kind of physical data leakage style attacks from concept to, if you could show like evidence that it was actually used by a threat actor, like that I think that would be really cool kind of research. So you can follow all of these academic papers.
that would be fascinating. That would be a hard talk to put together.
It would. And like a lot of these today, if you're following the AI trend that we have today, so many of these academic papers are based on like AI stuff too.
Thanks for calling it a trend.
It is a trend. Yeah, it's very much a trend that we're harping on. It in this feed is really like an indication of the trend. You can kind of scroll through and like see where all of the computer science kind of research is going, and a lot of it is in AI, which is interesting.
It's a trend, not a fad. There's a difference.
How many of us use Ubiquiti in some capacity at home or support someone that's using Ubiquiti? So there is a critical vulnerability that was patched in Unify network applications. So this is only if you've installed the Linux application on your own, right? So you can buy a cloud key or a firewall from Ubiquiti and it has the Unify management interface, or you can go get like their Linux application and install it yourself in a VM or whatever. So if you install the Linux app yourself and an attacker has already gained administrative level credentials to the management interface, then there's a command injection in play. One of the reasons why I'm kind of flagging this story is I'm trying to update my Ubiquiti stuff, and I have a Gen 1 cloud key, and I can only get my Gen 1 cloud key right now. And there's folks listening, I know, that are like, oh, I've dug into this like really deep, and you can get it to the latest version, Paul, and here's what you do, and I want to hear from you. because I love you and I would love support on this. But I managed to get mine to like version 7,
Mhm.
but this vulnerability exists in version 8 and prior. In version 8 is the latest. So like my Gen 1 cloud key, one of them I could only get to 7, but it's really the Gen 1, the cloud key is really just a IoT device, if you will,
Yep.
that runs Debian.
Yep.
And so you get a command shell, command prompt on that as root. I log into it and then I'm like, oh, it's like Debian. Then I'm like, oh, I can do stuff on it. I'm like, but if I mess this up, I could really mess up the Wi-Fi for my home. And then my family is going to be really mad at me. So I'm going to tread really lightly on this particular thing.
Yeah.
But also now I've got this vulnerability that I'm like, well, doesn't affect the cloud key because again, the way I read this was it was only if you've installed the application yourself, which I've dabbled with in the past. So there are people that from my like research, like are really into Ubiquiti, like really like grok everything that Ubiquiti is putting out there. And thankfully post on all the forums and I'm reading all the posts, but yeah, I'm kind of at this crossroads where I'm like, do I put time and effort into updating not just for my home, but for now here in the studio, right? Like the Gen 1 cloud key, or do I go to a more modern platform where it's the firewall, like it's the gateway device? Do I go buy gateway devices that also have the ability to manage the access points and then also just use that as my firewall kind of thing?
I feel your pain, Paul, and arguably you probably won't be able to get the newer versions of the software on your Gen 1 cloud key. It's like the iPhone, like or your
like
Android
at
device.
some
You can
point,
only,
like
you can
they
only
draw-
go so far.
They drew a line in the sand, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because the processing arguably the processing requirements from the manufacturer are too high for the current the older module. And I'm right there with you. I've got 3 Gen 1 cloud keys at home that like I'm not using because they were part of the Sans kit that when we used to do pre-pandemic version of the code.
But I'm like, now do I go to the app or do I just update? Do I just replace my firewall within Ubiquiti? I wish Tyler was on the show because I've been communicating with him and he's like, dude,
You
just
get
go
a Dream
Dream
Machine Pro.
Yeah,
Just
that's
get a
exactly
Dream
what he
Machine
says.
Pro.
He's like, dude,
That's what
just
I've
go.
got. It works beautifully well. You can even do your video surveillance off of it. It's got spots for one hard drive in it to do
that's
video
exactly.
surveillance.
Josh, you are saying exactly what Tyler said.
Yep.
Go Dream Machine Pro. Forget about the cloud key. Forget about whatever
bother.
firewall you're
It has a
using.
cloud
Replace
key
them
built in.
both.
It's easy. It's rack mountable. It's simple.
$500. He's like, just go for it, dude. It's $500. Just go for it.
So, like Josh, you're selling me on this because the problem that I've got is that when I originally stood up my Ubiquiti network and added devices to it, I didn't have a cloud key, and you could run the application local to your desktop. You could run it on your Mac,
and that's what this is referencing.
And it became all adopted to the installation running on my Mac.
Correct.
And during the pandemic, I had a problem and I had to switch laptops. And guess what didn't come across? So guess what I can't manage unless I set up a new instantiation and readopt. All of the wireless.
So my research tells me if I buy a new Ubiquiti firewall, I have to readopt all my access points and do everything from scratch. Like the migration is not great.
Nope.
Yeah, well, they don't want the migration to be great. They basically want you to buy. Ubiquiti has a plan. Basically, they want you to buy all new stuff every time.
Yeah,
and because they abandon everything. And by the way, Larry, do you know about the Wi-Fi Man box they have there for $99?
No.
Oh, go to the store.ui.com and pick up one of the $99 Wi-Fi Mans. It's a standalone Wi-Fi mapping solution.
Interesting. All right.
Like seriously, get one. It's awesome.
So I don't know. That's where I'm at. I'm at a crossroads right now with Ubiquiti. There's vulnerabilities and there's upgrade paths, and none of it is great, to be honest with you. But having said all that, I still like Ubiquiti. I think that the gear is awesome. It works really well. And sure, if you upgrade them, you can get some pretty awesome. You were talking about before, Larry, about different wireless standards and access points. And I'm like, well, crap. If I update my Ubiquiti firewall, readopt all my access points, like why wouldn't I go buy one of their new Wi-Fi 7
The U7 Pros.
Yeah. Why wouldn't I just go buy one new? I've got one centrally located access point where most of my devices gravitate towards because it's in my upstairs hallway, right? So as you go from first floor to second floor in my home, there's a point in the ceiling where I can put an access point. It looks like a smoke detector. The wife doesn't complain about it, doesn't even know it's there. It's like, whatever. If I update that to the latest one, most of my devices will gravitate towards it, and I'll have awesome Wi-Fi for most of the house. I'm like, so why wouldn't I just go update the access point, but then I got to do the whole migration. And I'm basically like, that's a day where I have to take a time out from like everything else I'm doing. And that's a day, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Josh, like you the feedback is, like that's
No,
a day.
I agree entirely. It's going to take a day to redo everything, but
Yeah.
honestly, by the time you're done, I've been running my system here for 2 years, and other than adding, because the new house, other than adding devices, I barely touched the friggin' thing, honestly.
Yeah. So I don't know. Well,
I
maybe
update it, I check
we'll
it.
continue the Ubiquiti saga maybe for future episodes. I think that concludes this episode of Paul Security Weekly. I want to thank everyone for listening and watching. We'll see you next time. Larry, take us out.
Over and